Hello, everyone. I'm Mr. Five. Today, I'm going to tell you a true story about injustice, courage, and the power of justice. On a warm summer afternoon at Piedmont Park in Atlanta, Georgia, 15-year-old DeAndre Johnson, a black teenager, sat on a park bench enjoying a peaceful moment while waiting for his mother to pick him up. He had no idea that simply because of the color of his skin, he was about to face an unjust confrontation. Across the park, Margaret Thompson, a middle-aged white woman, watched DeAndre closely. A prejudiced thought crept into her mind. That boy looks suspicious. Something isn't right. And within minutes, a call to 911 would completely change DeAndre's afternoon. Margaret Thompson couldn't take her eyes off DeAndre. In her mind, a black teenager sitting alone in the park couldn't simply be relaxing. He's been sitting there too long. Maybe he's watching someone. I need to act before something happens. With that thought, she quickly pulled out her phone and dialed 911. There's a suspicious teenager in Piedmont Park. He's just sitting there staring at people. I'm afraid he might be scoping the area for something bad. Her voice carried a mix of fake concern and urgency. On the other end of the line, the police dispatcher took the report seriously. A patrol unit was immediately dispatched to the scene. Meanwhile, DeAndre remained seated on the park bench, completely unaware that he had just been reported to the police for no reason other than the color of his skin. He stretched his legs, pulled his backpack closer, and scrolled through a few messages on his phone, occasionally glancing up at the passing crowds. He was simply waiting for his mother. But instead of his mother, 3 police cars with flashing red and blue lights suddenly pulled up in front of him. The sound of blaring sirens made people stop and turn their heads, curiosity filling the air. A group of officers, led by Officer Robert Evans, stepped out of their vehicles, their hands resting near their belts, where their guns and handcuffs were ready. One of them pointed directly at DeAndre, his voice cold and commanding. "Stand up now, hands up. What are you doing here?" DeAndre's eyes widened in shock, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea what was happening. DeAndre froze as he saw 3 police officers approaching with rigid postures, their hands hovering dangerously close to their holsters. The weight of suspicious stares bore down on him, turning what had been a peaceful afternoon into a nightmare. "Hands up and show me some ID," Officer Robert Evans commanded, his voice sharp and authoritative. DeAndre had no idea what was happening, but he knew one thing. Any wrong move could make things worse. Slowly, he raised his hands, his voice trembling, yet steady enough to show composure. "Officer, I'm just waiting for my mom. I haven't done anything wrong." But Evans wasn't listening. He glanced at Margaret Thompson, who stood with her arms crossed and a look of satisfaction on her face. Evans gave a small nod, as if her suspicion alone was enough proof to justify this entire situation. "Do you have any weapons on you?" another officer asked, his eyes filled with distrust. DeAndre swallowed hard, trying to keep his breathing steady. He knew that resisting, even in the slightest way, could put him in danger. "No, sir," he said firmly. "I only have my phone and a book in my backpack." Evans stared at him for a moment, then motioned for his fellow officers to search DeAndre's backpack without asking for permission. As they rummaged through his belongings, Margaret chimed in, her voice laced with certainty. "I told you, he's been sitting there for hours. Who does that, unless they're up to something?" A mix of anger and helplessness boiled inside DeAndre. Why was he being treated like a criminal just because of the color of his skin? But before things could escalate any further, a black SUV screeched to a halt right beside the police cars. The door swung open, and out stepped a woman with an aura of unwavering authority. Viola Davis, DeAndre's mother, had arrived. The door of the black SUV swung open, and Viola Davis stepped out with an air of authority and strength. Her stride was firm, her sharp gaze scanning the scene before her. She didn't need to ask what was happening. Just the sight of 3 officers surrounding her son was enough for her to understand. She didn't waste a single second on Margaret Thompson. She walked straight to DeAndre. "Are you okay?" Viola's voice was low but firm. DeAndre nodded, but his eyes betrayed his fear. He knew his mother wouldn't let this situation go unanswered. Margaret, realizing Viola's presence, crossed her arms, her expression turning sour. "Who are you? You're interfering with an investigation." Viola turned to face her, her eyes burning with restrained fury. "I'm the mother of the boy you called the police on for nothing more than sitting on a park bench." Viola spoke slowly, but each word was razor sharp. Officer Evans stepped forward, trying to regain control of the situation. "Ma'am, we received a call about a suspicious individual." "Suspicious? Where?" Viola cut him off. "Do you have any evidence, or are you just acting on the word of a white woman who felt uncomfortable seeing a black boy in a park?" No one responded immediately. Margaret quickly interjected, her voice defensive. "I was just trying to keep the park safe. Who knows what he was planning?" Viola turned to Margaret, stepping closer. "Number, you weren't keeping anyone safe. You were enforcing your own bias. You didn't call the police when white teenagers sat here, did you?" Margaret opened her mouth to argue, but Viola's commanding presence silenced her. Officer Evans hesitated, realizing the situation was slipping beyond his control. Viola crossed her arms over her chest. "I want to know right now, what exactly do you plan to do next?" Officer Robert Evans shifted his focus to Viola Davis, trying to maintain his composure, but her commanding presence unsettled him. His eyes darted around, noticing that several bystanders had started recording the encounter. "Mrs. Davis," he attempted to explain, "we were just following procedure. We received a call reporting a suspicious individual." Viola immediately cut him off. "A suspicious individual? Do you have any evidence that my son did anything wrong, or is it just because he's a black boy sitting in a park?" Evans hesitated. The other officers began avoiding Viola's gaze, realizing they had no legitimate reason to detain DeAndre. Margaret Thompson, sensing the situation turning against her, quickly interjected, "I just thought he didn't belong here. I meant no harm. I was only concerned for everyone's safety." Viola sharply turned toward Margaret, her eyes piercing. "Concern for who? The people here, or your own discomfort at seeing a black boy?" Margaret stiffened, but clung to her weak defense. "I was just doing what any mother would do." Viola let out a dry laugh, her voice low but heavy with meaning. "If my son were a white boy, would you have called the police?" Margaret pressed her lips together, silent. Evans glanced at his watch, realizing this situation was turning into a public relations nightmare. Viola crossed her arms, her voice cutting through the tension. "I want to know, right now. Are you going to apologize and leave, or do I need to take this directly to the Atlanta Police Department?" The entire park fell silent, waiting for Evan's response. The air in the park was thick with tension. Every eye was on Officer Robert Evans, waiting to see what he would do next. Evans took a deep breath, realizing the situation had spiraled beyond his control. If he pushed forward, this could escalate into a full-blown media crisis, and his name might be on the front page of every newspaper by morning. He glanced at his fellow officers before slowly nodding. "You're free to go, kid." His voice lacked the authority it had earlier. DeAndre exhaled, relieved, but still shaken. Viola studied her son for a moment before turning back to Evans. "And what about an apology?" Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of generations who had been wronged. Evans hesitated, then finally turned to DeAndre. "I'm sorry, kid." The words hung in the air, but they did nothing to erase the painful reality. DeAndre had been treated unfairly simply because of the color of his skin. And if Viola Davis hadn't arrived in time, who knew how this might have ended? Margaret Thompson, standing awkwardly, began to feel the weight of the judgmental stares from those around her. She took a step back, trying to slip away unnoticed. But before she could leave, she muttered under her breath, "I was just doing what I thought was right." Viola crossed her arms, locking eyes with her. "No, you acted on your prejudice, and today you learned that prejudice can hurt innocent people." The park slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but this story was far from over. Even though the park had returned to its usual rhythm for Viola Davis and DeAndre, this incident could not be forgotten. The very next morning, Viola was at the Atlanta Police Department filing an official complaint about how the officers had treated her son. She demanded an internal investigation into how suspicious calls were handled, especially those that might be racially motivated. At the same time, a video capturing the entire confrontation at Piedmont Park began circulating on social media. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times, with countless comments condemning the officers' actions and Margaret Thompson's racial bias. The hashtag #Justice for DeAndre quickly went viral. The media got involved. Civil rights organizations spoke out. The growing pressure forced the Atlanta Police Department to issue a public statement. In a tense press conference, the department spokesperson promised to improve how officers respond to suspicious activity calls and announced mandatory racial bias training for all personnel. Officer Robert Evans, who had confronted DeAndre that day, was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. As for Margaret Thompson, she couldn't escape the consequences either. Under public scrutiny, she was required to attend a racial bias awareness course. But for Viola Davis, this wasn't enough. She was determined to turn this outrage into real change, not just for her son, but for every black child who could face the same injustice. Viola didn't stop at filing a complaint or making a viral statement. She partnered with civil rights organizations, pushing for policy reforms to prevent racially motivated 911 calls from leading to unnecessary police confrontations. Meanwhile, DeAndre, once a victim of racial profiling, became a voice for change, speaking at forums, sharing his story, and raising awareness about racial injustice. Prejudice can cause needless harm, but we can fight back by speaking up, demanding justice, and educating our communities. My advice to you, if you see injustice, don't stay silent. Stand up for what's right, because even the smallest action can lead to meaningful change.